What's the Prime Minister? What is the Just getting back to the Premier Weatherall's point, what is the evidence-based, sophisticated explanation as to why Dr Finkel is wrong and you're right? You can achieve this under the current strategy.
Well, I think you're putting a lot of words into Dr Finkel's mouth. I mean, I don't know what you're referring to, but his interim report refers to a number of studies with modelling. There have been other studies and other modelling that comes to different conclusions. The fact of the matter is that we are undertaking a review. I know it's always appealing to have instant answers, but we are not going to undertake steps which will increase the cost of electricity for Australian families, for Australian businesses, and imposing a tax on electricity generation, which is essentially what is being proposed, would add to the cost, would add to that burden, and that is clear. So we have succeeded in meeting and beating our targets to date, and we continue to do so in the future, but we welcome the review. We initiated the review, naturally. There's a lot of work to be done on it, a lot of collaboration. It's complex. There are a lot of complex engineering issues that we discussed with the Chief Scientist relating to ensuring that renewable energy and renewable distributed energy is properly integrated into a modern electricity grid.
The question on that is whether or not you should rule out at the outset, before you've conducted your review, whether or not you should rule out one of the possible solutions. And to the Premier of South Australia, you pointed to some of the problems. Do you acknowledge that the amount of renewables in your system actually is causing a security problem? The Prime Minister first. Are you going to rule?
Well, our policy is very clear. We do not support a carbon tax or an emissions trading scheme. That's our policy.
We're not.
How do you think?
I know can we just let the South Australian Premier answer the question?
Well, first thing is we're not proposing a carbon tax, and it's mischievous to suggest that we are. It's also even mischievous to suggest that we're proposing an emissions trading scheme, because that wasn't the proposition that was put here. It was an emissions intensity scheme, a different thing, easy to misrepresent if you want to. Of course, that the whole point of Dr Finkel's recommendation is that this puts downward pressure on electricity prices, so this gives you lower electricity prices. And we've seen the CSIRO's modelling just this week estimate that there would be a $216 per annum per household reduction in their electricity bills on average across the nation, probably higher in places like South Australia. So this is about reducing the electricity bills for ordinary consumers. How does it do that? Well, the reason it does that is that there has been a very substantial period of underinvestment in our electricity generation system. And what Dr Finkel finds is that the reason for that underinvestment is policy uncertainty. And we've had policy uncertainty for well over a decade in this country. Indeed, in 2006, it was a series of state chief ministers and premiers who were proposing another solution to essentially try and find a way of sending the integration between emissions reduction and into the energy market so that we would get proper investment in the system. So the reason that we have instability, as you describe it, is twofold. One is a rather unfortunate privatisation of our electricity market, which deliberately scotched an interconnector with New South Wales to try and drive up the price of the electricity sale, the electricity market sale. And secondly, the inability to properly put a price on carbon to send the right signals to integrate energy policy and emissions policy, which would have changed the mix of generation and would have meant that we don't have some of the challenges that we have in relation to stability in our system.
You said you didn't think there was a need for, I think you said exotic market schemes. What were the alternatives that you alluded to that you think could fix this problem on the East Coast?
Well, I guess the point I'm making is that these schemes assume or presume that you're going to have basically a perfect market in electricity, and by definition you can't. there are natural monopolies involved. There are different fuel mixes. There is different requirements for baseload, mid-merit and peaking plant. And what I advocate is that, market mechanisms got a role. I don't deny that. But if you want to look at all those things, plus an emissions target, whatever it might be, you need to go back to some fundamentals. And I just find it quite incredible that Australia, with probably the world's richest and most diverse natural energy sources, has got the sort of problems that have been experienced on the East Coast. I mean, that should never, ever have happened. And I agree with Jay on one thing. For 10 years, there's been a lack of coherence around national energy policy.
Do you three believe that an EIS should have been left on the table during the course of this review? Or are you comfortable with it having been taken away as an option going forward?
Well, I've made the point that we're making significant investments in renewables. We don't have any plans to implement such a scheme, but I'm happy to have the debate. I'm happy to listen and learn and to have a proper discussion. And if you're going to get one of the and I know Alan Finkel well, if you're going to get one of the sharpest minds in our nation, then you don't tie his hands at the start of that process. You allow it to run. You allow it to run.
So you're going to look at gas then, Premier. One of the big things that came out of that report is that he would like some onshore gas exploration in your state.
He's free to recommend whatever he thinks is the best mix, and then we'll have a proper process. I wouldn't be ruling things out as subject matter for his review. He should be allowed to go and do his review using the best science and the best consultation he can, and then we'll consider it in due course. We have a moratorium, not a ban, on conventional onshore, and we're getting our chief scientist to look at those matters properly and appropriately. That's a very new approach in our state, one that perhaps the national government could learn from.
From my just a couple of quick points on this. I mean, ultimately, what you need is a national policy, and the Prime Minister has done absolutely the right thing and asked a whole range of people, including Dr Finkel, to look at all measures and bring back recommendations across energy mix, stability, renewable, everything, all part of it. And I totally support that. I think one of the challenges we have at the moment is we have individual states doing individual things. Renewable energy targets here, not there. That is not leading to the right sort of outcomes that we need. So what we do is support the federal government in the sense of undertake this review. Let's get to a federal position, and the Prime Minister's got every right to say what they will consider and won't consider. Let's get to the end of this review and we will play a constructive role in looking at what the best way is forward. There is undoubtedly more work to do in this, but from our point of view, it needs the federal government's leadership. The Prime Minister is doing exactly that through this review. We will wait for that review, and then as you see in the communique, we're going to consider that at the next going.
And I agree with exactly what Mike said. Once again, we need national energy policy, but I do want to come back to this gas issue. Queensland is indeed perhaps, the energy state in terms of our LNG industry, a $70 billion industry that we created, which is driving our economic growth in our state, as well as our coal exports. But also too, we've just announced a further 2 exploration tenements for gas as well. And what Dr Finkel said very clearly today is that gas is absolutely vital as we do this transition. So I think what you see is different states have got their own plans. We've got a plan of 50% renewables by 2030. We have a really good energy mix going forward, and Queensland has a clear plan when it comes to that.